Hello there everybody and welcome to the Talking City podcast, brought to you by the Manchester Evening News. And look at me, I'm in the studio, first time. Please be gentle with me, I'm getting a bit nervous, there's lights, there's cameras, but here we are. And I'm not here alone, thankfully. I'm also here, of course, with Mr. Joe Bray. Joe, how's it going?
It's good to see you, Dan. It's been a while, isn't it?
It certainly has. I feel like this...
Literally in living colour, as you always
say. That's exactly what I was going to say. I took my line. But yeah, it's great. I do, as I've just said prior to this, I do feel like I'm going to get grilled by Paxman or something, maybe like a little dapper laughs on news night, getting absolutely slagged off. Thankfully, I haven't worn my turtleneck, so it's not going to be too bad. But I tell you, who is feeling a bit bad today, of course, it is Manchester City. Because, Joe, it's finally happened. The first defeat of the season, 1-0 to Newcastle United. City's Carabao Cup dreams are over once again, a third year running. You were there last night up in Newcastle. Apart from being windy as all hell, how was it?
It was not a bad game, considering that City lost. Obviously, they made all the changes. Guardiola went into it and said, yeah, we're going to have to play the youth team. Then he didn't, because he said the youth team aren't ready, and that's absolutely fair. And he rested the likes of Diaz, Walker, Haaland, Foden. The team was probably what you expected, and the performance was therefore, it followed that, didn't it? Because when you have a team full of players who haven't played a lot, it's not going to be as fluent and as joined up as it usually is. But I think there were positives to take. There were some good performances. A few players sort of staked a claim that they would have wanted to for Guardiola and showed that they can step in. There's no real shame in losing at St James's Park nowadays, I don't think, especially against what was a slightly stronger Newcastle side. And I think if you're going to lose your first game of the season, losing early in the Carabao Cup is probably the one to do it. So yeah, they might be disappointed there's no quadruple, but it's not the worst defeat in the world.
No, not at all. I mean, for City, Guardiola, I think we were just talking before we came in here, and it seems like the first time ever that he's kind of really been dismissive of the Carabao Cup. I'd say he's always made changes in the earlier rounds. He's won it 4 times. He likes the competition. You know, we've discussed before. He likes it because it breeds winning. You win your first trophy in February. You can usually it's a building block. It's a springboard. You know, United last year won it. They got to an FA Cup final. They didn't manage to win anything, but it was such a confidence booster, especially for them getting their first trophy win in 6.5 years. It's not going to be, as important for City. But for the first time, even though he made changes, he wasn't making changes against Burton Albion or Swansea City, a League One Championship side this time. It was against a competitive Premier League team. They only beat 1-0 at home earlier this season. But even though it was a defeat, I think Guardiola will be fairly pleased. He didn't look it after at full time and he made a beeline for the referee. But otherwise, I think he'd be pleased. The only thing he said before the match's press conference, that he just didn't want it to be like Southampton. I think he even said you can lose, but you've got to put in a performance. And he earmarked the Southampton defeat last year in the tournament as the worst performance of his City managerial career, and he probably doesn't have many other contenders. They were shocking that night. It was so untypical City display. They just lacked absolutely anything, and in contrast, this was a really recognisable display from City, almost too typically City, where they completely dominated the first half. I think at one stage, in about the 35th minute, Newcastle had only made one pass in their own final third, as was City's complete dominance with 70% possession, but they weren't making that complete dominance count, and then Newcastle were very unfortunate not to take the lead just before the break when a quick counter, they sprung through Jacob Murphy, forcing Ortega into a good save. But other than Julian Alvarez being played through by Oscar Bob, City had no real chances. And in the second half, when Newcastle came out full of fire, City kind of, as we've seen, like I say, a stereotypical display, they just didn't have that kind of spark. They were a bit flat and against a bit of a raucous crowd in that second half. A team who were more up for it, they just kind of crumbled in the end.
And I think that was just because of the players playing. That Oscar Bob, Julian Alvarez chance, if Bob had played more and if he had a bit more confidence, he has a shot and he probably finds the bottom corner. But he's doing what he thinks he should do, which is playing the player who's probably got a better shooting opportunity. Now Guardiola turned away and he couldn't believe that Bob didn't shoot, and he said after the game he was a bit shy, and if he'd played a bit more he would have had a shot there. And I think those sort of instances of just that lack of fluency that you don't get with players who played a lot, they didn't have that final ball, just wasn't there, was it? And it's understandable, and I think Eddie Howe changed the game at half time and that won them the game. He took off their 2 inexperienced teenagers and he brought on Bruno Guimaraes and Anthony Gordon, and suddenly they're all flying into challenges. The fans were up for it. They were cheering, free kicks, possession wins, throw-ins even, and then they get the goal, and suddenly, after being very, very quiet, and City fans were mocking the Newcastle fans for how quiet it was, suddenly it's the St James's Park that we come to expect. And I think when you've got a young team, like Rico Lewis played well, but he was targeted a bit in that second half and he had to stand up. Oscar Bob clearly has never played in an atmosphere like that. Even Sergio Gomez and Calvin Phillips haven't had that experience and haven't got that fluency in the legs to respond to that. So I think that sort of showed in the second half, and Guardiola could have brought on Kyle Walker for a bit of experience to calm things down. He could have brought on Erling Haaland. He decided against it at the end of the game without a striker. That must be the first time in 2 seasons I played a game or any minutes without a striker off the top of my head. So it sort of showed where Guardiola's priorities were. He wanted to use it to rest players. He said after the game Haaland was never really going to play, and he could have brought him on for the last 10 or 15 minutes, but decided it was probably better to give him the full rest and save him. And yeah, he has made changes in the Carabao Cup in the early rounds in previous years, but they've gone through and then they've been able to attack it. And I think that Southampton game is the one that Pep said before the game. He said after the game, before he was saying he didn't recognise his side, and it was a very similar team, to be honest. You had Phillips making his first start of the season in that game. Gomez played. Grealish was sort of the most, probably one of the most experienced attackers in the side. Alvarez was up front on his own. A lot of players with a point to prove. They didn't make that point at Southampton, and Guardiola a couple of weeks later goes off and slags off everyone at the club for not having the right mentality. And he said last week that he's seen that mentality this time, that they're ready to go and defend the titles. And he said after the game that it was completely different to Southampton, and he did see players putting the effort in. So in that respect, it's a positive.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we'll delve into the performances themselves in part 2, but it wasn't that any of the kind of the second string, if you like, coming in were bad at all. Individually, I think, as your ratings reflected and as we'll discuss, I think they all played pretty well individually. But when you're making, when 5 players are coming in one go who aren't regular starters, who are getting the first significant minutes of the season, there's going to be rhythm issues, there's going to be a bit of disjointedness, and there just wasn't that sort of, other than Oscar Bob, who we will talk about, I promise, twice setting Alvarez away, there just wasn't that killer pass, that bit of spark in the attack. And as you say, the halftime changes, Newcastle kind of blinked first, and it proved to be the right call from Eddie Howe. I think Anthony Gordon's introduction in particular was kind of the catalyst. It was his tackle on Mateo Kovacic a couple of minutes after the break. He absolutely steamed in around right in front of the dugouts, and it was one of those tackles that people get up off their seats and cheer, just a get in sort of tackle. And that was what really riled the crowd up. And then after about 4 minutes later, Alexander Isak sticks it in at the back stick, and it, as I said, it was recognisable City performance, because you kind of just thought, you don't really see City getting into this. It was just one of those where they just were a bit flat, couldn't really be bothered. I think maybe that's a bit harsh, but they weren't going to cry over spilt milk with this performance, and I think they were just more happy to get away. I know there was no extra time, but no added stress with a penalty shootout. I know the poor guys had to get the coach home, all the luxury coach travel all the way home to Manchester in the middle of the night. The poor boys, but otherwise they kind of wanted to get in, get out, and it was just one of those performances. And hopefully the point has to be now that it doesn't kind of rock the confidence and the momentum they had been building in the league and Champions League. Yeah,
you mentioned the player ratings. At one point I had 6s all down the list, because it was sort of just a 6 out of 10 performance, and no one played particularly bad, no one really stood out for the whole game. And yeah, it was just, I think the difference between the sides was that half-time change, and Newcastle for that sort of 10, 15, 20 minutes at the start of the second half did enough to win the game, and Guardiola decided he's not going to bring on Haaland to try and get back into it. And the players who had put so much effort in the first half and played so well sort of ran out of steam a little bit in the second half. And yeah, there weren't too many disappointed faces at halftime walking off the pitch. I think it was just like, well, we have had a go. It's been a competitive game. There's no one's can walk off that pitch saying that they played badly. And a few players playing out of position. Josko Gvardiol, for example, was at centre back for the first time, which was a positive. Nathan Ake was at left back and left wing and attacking midfield and everywhere. And it was just a lot of players just out of position or in different positions than they'd been used to. So Guardiola really didn't seem too disappointed. I wouldn't have said it was a typical City performance in the fact that they've come back a lot this season from going behind and going level, and they've shown that they can do that. And that was something that Guardiola said the other day, that he's seen that mentality, that they do have that sort of character in the squad to come back. But you have that character when you've got Rodri on the pitch and Walker and Diaz and Bernardo, and just a bit more of a fluent attack and players who know exactly where the others are going to be. And you saw that a few times where there was just a pass that went for a runner, but the runner had stopped, and everything that you would expect from a team that clearly have never played together or don't play together that often. So yeah, disappointing to be out of the cup for City, but if you're going to go out, I think Guardiola said as much. It was a good way to go out, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll talk more on those performances in part 2 and talk about maybe the actual benefits that you've got from being out of the Carabao Cup. So do not go anywhere. Hello everybody and welcome back to the Talking City podcast. Now Joe, we're going to kind of delve into those performances that, as I've just said, like individually were quite good, even if they didn't quite work as a collective. And of course the highlight on the pitch on Wednesday night was Oscar Bob making his first competitive start for City in his natural kind of attacking midfield role rather than on the right wing where he's been playing off the bench in recent weeks. And for the first half at least, he was really I wouldn't want to say surprisingly good, as if everyone who's actually seen him didn't know his talent. I've probably seen him before in youth games, but it might maybe not have stood out as much. But in this attacking role, on his first start, he looked like he'd been playing there for years. He was so cool and collective on the ball, so like a sunburst of pace, wriggling through tight spaces. And as I've said in the first part, 2 incisive passes for Julian Alvarez, who on another day might have took his chances. Like, it was a great competitive start, and I get the feeling we'll be seeing a lot more of him.
Yeah, I think you said there, it's like he's been playing there for years. He has been in the youth team, and that's exactly the position where he won back-to-back Player of the Years in the academy. And he might not have got the headlines because he was the one in that hole, in that number 10, helping piece everything together for Borges, for Mabude, for Cole Palmer and McAtee before that. I think when you put him in that position, we've only seen him on the wing when he's come off the bench for the first team and in pre-season. But when you put him there, that's where he's comfortable, and he's happy sort of finding those pockets and wriggling out of spaces. There was one point where we said earlier today that he had 4 players on him, and we think, well, he's not going to get out of this, and he just wriggles through a lovely little bit of footwork and keeps possession. And Newcastle targeted him early on. They put Joe Linton on him, and they thought, right, there's a young lad here making his first start. We can really just push him off the ball, and they did for the first 5-10 minutes. But he recovered. He put his foot on the ball. He sort of got that little footwork to make space for himself, and just grew in confidence throughout the game. And I think it says a lot that when City needed a goal and it clearly wasn't working with Julian Alvarez, who had a quiet game up front on his own, apart from those 2 chances, Guardiola didn't bring on Haaland, and he moved Bob up front and played him as the false 9 for a little bit, and then later on he switched him to the wing and put Foden there. But for Guardiola to trust him to try and find a goal, noticing how well he played, and I asked Guardiola after the game, I said, did anyone take the chance? And the first person he said was Bob. He said he played really well, he played naturally, and he was very, very pleased with him. And I think because he's the only youngster, Guardiola's faced a lot of questions, about Bob, and you can see at times he's trying to just downplay, because I wouldn't say he is on the same level as Palmer, as McAtee, and as players like that, but he's still clearly a very talented player, and if he continues to take his chance like that, then Guardiola can't ignore him, and will have to play him. And it's a shame for him that City are out of the Carabao Cup, because that's the competition that he would get games in, although United away as a potential 4th round game, had they got through, might not have been the game to play in. But on the basis of especially the first half against Newcastle, I think he'll get a lot more games. And Newcastle won the game because they played him out of the game in that second half. They clearly identified Bob as someone who was getting space and creating chances, and marked him out of the game in the second half.
Yeah, he was really pulling the strings in that first half. I thought what impressed me so much was just how kind of, I know we talked about in the first half that he should have shot perhaps instead of passing to Alvarez, but in the moment I don't think you could, like, with hindsight maybe, but I don't think in the moment you could particularly call him for passing to the striker who was maybe a bit wider, but was certainly further forward.
Pep did.
Pep did.
Turned around
He's the boss.
even before Alvarez had a shot, because he was right in front of me. Pep was head in hands, but I mean, it comes with
that. Well, that comes with games, of course. Like, you know, that shows what he still has to learn, and if he wants more minutes. But again, I don't think we're not the tactical geniuses of Guardiola, of course. But like, when he passed the ball, and like, if Alvarez sticks that in, is the criticism the same? Probably from Guardiola. I don't think any of us would have highlighted it as such. But his composure every other time, I thought he always made the right decision. When a quick pass was needed, a one-touch pass off to someone behind him to the side, he did it. When there was the time called to putting his foot on the ball and taking a second to kind of appraise the situation and then make his move, I just thought he looked so, for a 20-year-old lad making his first start. He just looks so composed in there, in a central position. Let's not kind of forget that Guardiola still doesn't particularly trust all the time Foden to play there. So it's, Bob's probably going to continue playing on the wing when he comes on in the league, you'd expect. But to get a chance there and to play so well, to get praise from Guardiola after playing there, I think that really does stand him in good stead. Like, in a year's time, does he get a 30 million quid move to Chelsea? Who knows? City, if the offer comes in, City will probably take it. But for the year at least, they have replaced Cole Palmer when it looked like they might have been a bit short on attacking options.
Yeah, and I think Palmer's had equivalent games where he's come on and looked really good, and it's up to Bob now to build on this. And if he does come on in the league, even if it's to rest the legs for the last 10 minutes or so of another player, he's got to continue doing that. But yeah, I think a number of compliments are for Bob that he got a chant from the City fans up high in that stand. I'd love to say I remember it, but I've had about 3 hours sleep, so that's my excuse for not remembering that. I mean, there's a group of Norwegian journalists who follow City now because of Erling Haaland, and every press conference we get a question on Haaland, and it's sort of become an expectation now. But the question was about Bob this time, because Bob is, of course, a Norwegian under-21 international, and is sort of starting to make headlines back in his home country. And he was the talking point after the game.
Well, another talking point, of course, is Calvin Phillips. He was making just his 5th start for City, going on to 18 months since joining the club. It's been a tumultuous time at City, of course. 2 of those starts were when the Premier League season was already finished. Did he do enough to kind of change his stature in the club, I suppose? I'm not sure, but I thought he did quite well, especially the first half. There was maybe 2 sloppy moments in the game. I think maybe one when he gave the ball away. But other than that, he looked assured in there. He looked like he finally kind of belonged a bit more. Now, we'll talk about Wolves in part 3. I don't know if he's done enough to start there, but it's a big week for him, as he admitted. He came on against Forest, did well, dug in when City needed him. He's come in for, as I say, his 5th start here, and did all right. He didn't, not to sound too harsh, but he didn't show himself up as he has done in previous starts. The Southampton match, the match that always sticks to mind is the Leicester City game, which was his longest performance in the Premier League. I think he came on with over half an hour to go in that match, and that was his longest until he made his first start, and that was a disaster. City were 3-0 up and they won 3-1, but they easily could have drawn that match, which would have been really damaging to the title change. And a lot of it wasn't just Phillips. Gomez, as we'll talk to in a minute, he played his part as well in that, but he really kind of instigated a near disaster in that game, and it looked like his time at the club would be coming to an end. Now, he's made the brave stance of staying, fighting for his place. You've got to admire that. When Matheus Nunes was signed, it almost seemed like he'd been pushed down the pecking order further. But with Rodri suspended, he got his chance here. How do you think he did?
I think he looked a bit nervous at the start, and he admitted to us that it is the biggest week of his City career, and maybe that was playing on his mind a bit. And Newcastle, the first 5-10 minutes were quite physical in that midfield, but like the others, he grew into it. And yeah, he didn't do especially great, but he also didn't drop any clangers, which we spoke about the Southampton game. He was one of the worst performances in that game and was at fault for both of the goals in that game. And if Guardiola hasn't seen any of those issues from the Southampton game in the Newcastle one, then I think Phillips deserves credit just for doing the basics right. I think we've got to judge him differently to other players. So Nunes has come in and looks at home straight away. Phillips clearly is one of those who needs a bit longer, and I think Guardiola said on on Tuesday that he's not been able to have the same impact as Marcelo Bielsa, for example, on Phillips' career. So it's I think it's going to be a slow project. I'm not sure he's done enough to start against Wolves just because Kovacic is back. Nunes is an option as well, but he's not done his long-term chances any harm. And I think, like a lot of players, he's shown that he can come in and with better players around them, he'll be able to slot in and do well. But I think because he was probably one of the more senior players in what was a very, very inexperienced side, he probably felt the weight of that a little bit as well. But if you let him just play his game, the more confidence he gets, the better player he will be. So he'll be stronger in the long run. But yeah, it wasn't the sort of standout performance some people would have been hoping for, but it also wasn't a disaster, and I don't think it was, as I said before, 6 out of 10.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I mean, another one to come in, which wasn't surprising, but it was kind of surprising where he played, was Sergio Gomez. I think we all kind of expected him to be in at left back. He's looked pretty promising this season, but instead he was in on the right wing, which of course is his kind of natural position, playing for Spain under 21s and Anderlecht beforehand. And I thought he looked quite again, this is pretty much all from the first half. City were kind of played out a bit in the second when Newcastle really got in amongst them. But that first half display, I thought Gomez looked quite handy on the right, quite dangerous. He's got a good delivery on him.
Yeah, we looked at the team sheet and we had no idea where Gomez was going to play because he was named as the 5th outfield player, which suggested that the back four would be the back four who played. So does that mean that he plays next to Phillips? Does that mean that he plays on the wing? But then where does Grealish play? And while we were talking about where anyone could play, I mean, could Gomez play at left back and Lewis in midfield, for example? Not once did right wing come up. And then even before kickoff, he just stands on that right wing spot. And we're like, okay, that's a choice. But that is, as we say, his natural position. And he looked good on the left wing against Red Star, sort of playing that sort of Kyle Walker equivalent role of covering the entire flank. He was always looking to come inside because he's left-footed and quite bright. He was getting a lot of coaching on the sidelines from Guardiola. Another player who I think is, judging off the last 2 appearances, I don't think he's going to be used at left-back again for a long time. But if we're going to compare it to the Southampton game again with all the similarities, he was subbed at half-time and the away fans cheered because he was so bad. He was genuinely awful, and I think he would admit the same. But to say that he's now found a sort of a space in that team as a sort of covering winger on both sides is useful for him and for City. He's another one who's probably going to be disappointed that City are out of the Carabao Cup, because that would be 2 or 3 games before Christmas that he'd definitely get. I
do think one thing playing in Gomez's favour is that he's versatile, and Guardiola loves versatility. He has such a small squad because the vast majority of his players can play at least 2 roles and probably 3 or 4. Gomez is showing he can play left back, maybe not well, but he can play there. He can play on the flanks. He can come into midfield. He can do the Walker doing the whole flank. He's got a few kind of strings in his bow. He can do a few different roles. Now, it's unlikely he'll do those roles in big competitive matches that really matter, but in the Champions League games against lesser opposition perhaps, or when that group stage is done, when the FA Cup rolls around, of course, and maybe the Club World Cup games, we don't know who they'll be against yet, but you imagine there might be some rotation there as well, given the fixture pile-up. He's given himself kind of a worth to Guardiola, I'd say, being so useful in the different positions, being able to cover. And as we said, City, the squad's even smaller this year, given the summer departures and the injuries that they've got. They've basically named 2 goalkeepers on the bench for the last 3 or 4 weeks, and on occasions haven't even filled the bench. So by making himself as useful as possible, he's giving himself, he's carving out a little spot for himself in the squad, even if his minutes don't improve drastically.
Yeah, and if he comes off the bench like he did against Fulham and provides an assist, he's another one who can, a bit like Oscar Bob, can come on and give Grealish a rest, or Bernardo or Foden, and if he can come on either side now, and he's got, as you say, an eye for a ball in the box. He's clearly got a good relationship with Haaland, for example, and other players. And he's one, like Phillips, who said in the summer, I don't want to leave, I want to fight from a place. And I think it's probably a good decision that he's not in defence anymore, because he wasn't a City standard left back, I don't think. But if he can reinvent himself, that's what, not a lot of players have done that, reinvent themselves in a different position for City after what was quite a low in that Southampton game at left back. So yeah, it's this is it. A lot of positives to come from the result, even if they're out of the cup.
Yeah, exactly. You know, as we said, a defeat, never good. The first defeat of the season, out of the tournament. But positives to be taken from it. Of course, Joe, being out of the tournament, the quadruple, or at least the domestic one, those dreams are over now. You got a bit of an eye off Guardiola, didn't you? Like one that could turn people into stone, I'd say, and you did well to shrug your way through it. You know, what was his reaction when you asked about that quadruple there? And did so justifiably, may I add.
Someone had to ask it, didn't they? It's, Phil Foden and Jack Grealish had said the only way to better the treble is to win the quadruple, and they wanted that high again. So the players had it in the mind that they wanted to win the quadruple. Guardiola brushed it off before the game, and after the game, he said it was never on the minds, and he insisted that they always make changes in the Carabao Cup in the early rounds, and they only start thinking of winning it when they get to the semi-finals, which is probably true. I would say that they've gone stronger in previous years, but given all the injuries and the suspensions and fitness issues, then his team was justified, and they just came up against a good side. They could have played a Championship or League One side and made all the changes and got through easily. So, they won't win the quadruple. But I think if you're going to go out of the Carabao Cup, you do it in the third round. And what this does is it frees up a game in the start of November. So they've got a free midweek, which is quite useful. They don't have back-to-back derbies at United, which, as much as it could be a good week if you win both of them, it's probably one that you want to avoid in the middle of a busy schedule. They don't have two semi-finals now in the first 2 weeks of January, which is a positive, because that's always when the fixtures add up, and the City made a run often in that month. But they've now got a January where they don't have a game in any midweek, which is got to be a positive for the other competitions. And it also means that they don't have to fit somehow a quarter-final in when they are in Saudi Arabia, which the quarter-final was set for that week when City are playing the semi-final in the Club World Cup. The EFL were aware of it back in June and in discussion, but there was no obvious date to play that quarter-final before the semi-finals. So there was a situation where they might have had to play a youth team, for example, and they might have had to play 2 or 3 more games only to go out then instead. So I think if you're going to go out in any season, you do it this year. And they've won the Super Cup already, so they could still win 4 trophies. They could win 5. It's really not the end of the world. So I can fully understand why Guardiola gave me a death stare when I asked about that, because it's just not on his mind.
Yeah, I mean, he said after the match, I don't want to waste energy on the competition at that stage, and we've never heard Guardiola be so kind of dismissive of the tournament. As we said, he usually likes to win it. That's kind of a change of face. But when he's got another tournament with the Club World Cup, as you say, it makes a lot of sense. You know, that fixture pile up in December is going to be bad enough. I think they have to fit a Brentford game in as well, which thankfully, because they lost to Arsenal, can be squeezed in one of those weeks now where there will be no Carabao Cup game at least. So that's not going to be too kind of a busy of a period.
There's another one as well, because the final of the Carabao Cup, they're due to play Bournemouth away. So if they'd got to the final, they would have had to fit in a trip to Bournemouth in midweek somehow, and that's when all the fixtures are adding up. Either in the quarter-finals, semi-finals of the Champions League, you've got no time to play that. So it just keeps having a knock-on effect for the fixtures, and I think he'll be quite pleased with going out so early, and he didn't seem, as I say, too disappointed.
So that's the most positive that's ever been happened after a City defeat, that's for sure. You know, we'll try and find as many positive points after that than us. I don't think you'll be able to. But, of course, City will need to get back to winning ways at the weekend, and we'll be back in just a moment to dive into Saturday's trip to Wolverhampton Wanderers. Stay where you are. Hello everyone and welcome back to the Talking City podcast for part 3, where we're going to look forward to Saturday's trip to Wolves. Now, Joe, the biggest talking point ahead of Saturday's game is, of course, that Rodri is still suspended. He served his the first match of his ban against Newcastle, which is conveniently timed at least, but 2 more to come, and of course Arsenal next week, which is not good at all. Who's going to come in to take his spot? I think the obvious answer is Mateo Kovacic. He came back and got a good 70 minutes on Wednesday. and then Matheus Nunes, who we'll talk a bit more about in a moment. But that Rodri role needs filling. Who's gonna fill those big boots?
Calvin Phillips will want it. I think Kovacic showed just what a classy player he is at Newcastle. I mean, from the first minute he was getting on the ball, and City haven't missed him obviously because they've won all the games when he's been missing. But I think Kovacic showed what he can bring to this team and why he's probably going to be a first choice midfielder while Kevin De Bruyne is out, just because his runs forward were clever. He just provided a bit of experience in that midfield in the first half, and I can see Guardiola leaning towards Kovacic probably at the base of midfield rather than Phillips, unless he does maybe a double pivot and plays Kovacic and Phillips, and that allows Kovacic to make those runs forward. You could put Nunes in there as well, who played well again when he came on and continues to start well. I can't see it being Phillips on his own, just because, as we said, he did okay, but not spectacular. Guardiola said he's got a chance, as everyone has, but I would lean towards Kovacic being a more steady option to get City back to winning ways, and just remind everyone that was a second string side that lost at Newcastle.
Now, this isn't to say that Rodri doesn't get forward. He's second top scorer this year with 3 goals. He's making himself a real goal threat this year, but is there a concern of either Kovacic or Nunes, or both of them being there, that they are both two players who, surprisingly so with Nunes, really like to get forward? And Kovacic especially, probably the thing he's best at is picking the ball up from deep and really driving forward with it. I think there was one moment in that first half against Newcastle when he did exactly that, and that was like, yeah. I think I've said on this podcast before, I kind of have my doubts over Kovac is kind of not quality per se. He's clearly a good player, but if he's good enough for City consistently, especially when you're replacing Gundogan. Now, in this scenario last season, Gundogan replaces Rodri, and it's hardly even a cause for concern. We've seen him do it in that season when Fernandinho was injured. He filled in there for the whole season. City won the league on the final day. But now, I'm not quite sure if Kovacic has... Maybe he'll surprise me. I hope he does. He's clearly rated by Guardiola, and likewise with Nunes, but I don't know if he has quite the tactical kind of astuteness and perhaps discipline to really do that kind of defensive role that Rodri does so well. And you're not going to tell me that, of course you can, but
I'm going to fully disagree, because I think he started really well, and for 25 million he's been what a signing, and he's slotted in straight away. He's won 4 Champions Leagues and a Europa League, and I think Spanish League a couple of times. He is a winner, and you don't play for Inter Milan, Real Madrid, Chelsea, Man City if you're not a bad player. And just the way that he dealt with the ball at Newcastle and just put his foot on it and kept things going. I think that time you mentioned when he raced forward, there was another time where he was the furthest man forward, and he didn't really know what to do and just stopped, but only because he didn't have any support. And his runs forward have been good. This could be a chance to see him in the sort of defensive area that we thought he would arrive and play in. So I suppose in that respect, you're right that we've not seen him in that yet, but which is why I think maybe Phillips and Kovacic could be a way to balance that out. If one goes forward, the other one stops. A bit like Phillips plays with Rice for England, but I don't think Kovacic would have any problem in changing his role. A bit like, as you mentioned, Gundogan last season, he could play defensive midfield, he could play attacking midfield, he could play false 9. If you're a player of that standard, I think you can change your role, and he's adapted to Guardiola's system very easily so far. So if he's fit, if he's got through that 65, 70 minutes, which felt like a planned substitution anyway, I can see him starting and doing well, whatever role he plays.
Yeah, I'd say I'm intrigued to see if he can do it and if he'll kind of be trusted to do that role, because it's probably the most important role in the City team, other than whoever's doing the kind of inverted defender role. Rodri's such an important player. They've lost I don't know, Rodri probably wouldn't have played against Newcastle even if he wasn't suspended. I wouldn't have thought, given the amount of minutes he's played, but they have lost the first match without him this season. It's not, did he play against Red Star?
He did.
Right,
scored.
So, of course. So he's the most important player. I think I did a piece the other day, like he's never missed 3 games in a row for City since he joined. He's only missed 2 games in a row twice, and I think the last time that happened was 2021. Practically an ever-present. If he's available, he plays. And to be without him, even against a team like Wolves, without being too disrespectful, it's going to be interesting to see how City adapts. And I do wonder if maybe, because Phillips does sit, I'm intrigued to see if he might just get the nod, because he will sit deep, and Kovacic, just in case he doesn't, can roam. But I'd be quite intrigued to see if Núñez and Phillips can play alongside each other as well. And of course, you've got whoever's going to come in from the defence into that midfield position as well. You'd probably imagine Kanji if he starts, even though he didn't have the best of days. But, with Stones out, it's quite intriguing. It's like for the first time in quite a while, it's going to be, because Rodri's such an ever-present, like how are they going to line that midfield up? And I know, Wolves have been quite a chaotic side. Obviously, the manager left on the eve of the season and Gary O'Neill's in. They've not been particularly bad, but they've lost. They drew with Luton last time out and lost to Ipswich in midweek in the Carabao Cup. They've only got one win, but they haven't been. And they got battered by Brighton, but who doesn't? Even when they've lost, and they've lost bad at times, they've not been bad. They took the lead against Liverpool and against United. And now this is United, so don't let me conflate the two. But United left Casemiro, their one defensive midfielder, quite exposed, and the midfield was so soft, and Wolves ran through them at will repeatedly. That was United trying to copy City's inverted fullback thing. It did not work whatsoever. City can do it a lot well, so I don't have any doubt that they'd get exposed or anything. But even though Wolves are down low in the table, have had a bad start, they have quite a few good attackers and have done, they've given City issues before, especially at Molineux. So I don't think it'd be quite, they'll batter them 5-0 now, but I don't think it'd be quite as easy as it perhaps looks on paper, especially with Rodri out.
I mean, you'll have the likes of Walker, Diaz, Haaland coming back. Foden didn't play the full 90. Who knows whether Bernardo will be fit or not. I think Alvarez will probably slot in that number 10 role that he's done very well behind Haaland, and that relationship is good. So it'd be good to see a midfield three of Phillips, Kovacic and Núñez. I think that could be quite dangerous if they sort of all rotate, but then where do you fit Alvarez in and what wingers do you have? So there are options, there are lots of different options. I don't think the loss of Rodri won't be felt too much if, as you say, you've got a Kanji who can push into midfield. Gvardiol can do the same if he's picked at left back. You can cover that area quite well. But I would say that Newcastle won the game in the Carabao Cup because in the second half they got a quality midfielder on the pitch and were a bit more physical in the centre and did that. So I think, City will have to be a bit stronger in midfield, whoever they pick. They'll have to be a bit more clinical in attack. But if you have Foden coming in off the right, if you have Grealish back on the left, you could pick Jeremy Doku, who loves to attack a defender, and then you've got Erling Haaland back. It will be a different side that face Newcastle, and it will also be a fresher side because a lot of those players had a rest. I would expect City to win relatively comfortably. Yeah,
do not mistake me. I think City should win. I don't think this result will knock them off their stride whatsoever. The Newcastle result, they should win. They should win comfortably, really. But I can just see with Rodri out, how do they adapt to that? It's interesting. I feel like for the first time, these games would usually be nothing to talk about. City v Palace. City are going to win. That's probably a bad example because Palace doing quite a bit, but City v Forest, City are going to win. City v Burnley, City are definitely going to win, probably by at least 3 goals. But for the first time in one of these games where City should win, it just feels like there's a bit of kind of unknown quality to the match. But at least, as you say there, Grealish is back. He got 90 minutes on Wednesday. How did you think he did there? And is he good to come straight back into the start?
I think first half he was good. He kept the ball. He did what you expect him to do and attract the defender and try and spread the play. Second half, I mean, as soon as Newcastle scored, Guardiola beckoned him over, and I mean, Newcastle was still celebrating in the corner, and Guardiola's having a word with Grealish and telling him to do whatever he wanted, and he kind of wanted a little bit more from Grealish to force the issue, but I think you've got to credit Newcastle for doing a job on him as well. And
Tino Livramento got player of the match and was really good in his first start as well and really marshalled him.
I mean, Grealish isn't a popular person at Newcastle, given his past comments on Miguel Almiron, although I will say when the players walked into St James's Park, he was the most popular player from the Newcastle fans. He got the most shouts, so he was the pantomime villain again. He did all right. He's still coming back from injury, and I would expect him to start at Wolves and probably silence a few players. And he's back in the Midlands. He's going to get a few boos as well, and he's going to love it.
Well, they actually quite a physical battle with Livramento. He went, the young right back went through him on a couple of occasions, and it was a good battle. I'm just wondering if, because he played 90 minutes and Kovacic only played 70, coming off presumably to start on Saturday, is there a kind of thought maybe it is Doku on the left or Foden, them two wingers starting and Grealish perhaps on the bench, given given he played the full game. But if you recall, it was last season against Wolves where Grealish really started to come alive as a City player, wasn't it? It was when he got absolutely kung fu kicks in the gonads, and the Wolves defender, whose name was Nathan Collins, was it? Oh,
possibly, yeah.
Who got the red for?
Yeah, that rings a bell.
For ringing his bell, so to speak, and he got this opening goal after 90 seconds in the match. It was the game where it kind of clicked for him as a City player. So maybe it's a good place for him to get this season going a bit more as well.
I think what City have now is wingers who can do different things. I've spoken about this in the last couple of podcasts, but you've got Doku who wants to attack his man and can play on either side and cut inside or go to the byline, and Grealish, if he wants to do that, can do it, but he also holds the ball up well. You've got Bernardo who can play in that inside channel, Foden as well, but Foden can also get to the byline. So Guardiola can look at Wolves and see how is the best way to affect their fullbacks and pick his wingers based on that. City ended the season with Grealish as an undroppable player on the left because he was so good. I think he's probably not undroppable anymore just because of the different profile of players they've got, but that doesn't mean he's playing any worse. It just means that City squad has a few more options now, and he will probably be stronger for it, that he doesn't have to play every game. But we know he loves environments like Wolves away, and where he is the villain and getting kicked all over the park, and he can just get up and, like you say, go and put one in the bottom corner.
Well, you say Grealish is going to be the villain, going to get booed. I think someone else might be taking his starring role at the weekend, because it will be the homecoming of Matheus Nunes back in Wolves after his kind of controversial departure in the summer. I think he will be in for quite the warm welcome, shall we say. But I think he'll start, and it's going to be interesting to see how he kind of reacts, because he's going to come in for quite the bit of stick you'd expect, given his exit.
And it's relatively soon since that exit, isn't it? It's
still raw.
It's still fresh in the memory of him going on strike, as we're led to believe, and saying that he wanted to move to City. And then Gary O'Neill, the manager, comes out and says he wasn't quite happy with how Nunes handled it. And I think the CEO or the transfer director or someone like that.
Hobbs is called. He does the most statements for a club kind of official I've ever seen. It always comes up.
He was not happy with Nunes, was he, either? And a lot of criticism, whether that's just Wolves trying to save face and say, this is what happened. But I mean, they still banked 55 million off a player they had for one season, which isn't a bad return. And I think Nunes has started well. I think he's keen to sort of not be the villain and sort of calm things down, but that's not going to stop the Wolves fans. And but he started well. He came on against Newcastle again, and he's got those driving runs sort of to the byline, just inside the area. I'm liking what I'm seeing from him so far, and this could be a game where it's a bit cathartic. I remember Grealish going back to Aston Villa early on in his first season, and he didn't start, but he came off the bench and he got roundly booed. But it's a different scenario because Grealish was a club captain and he came through the ranks there and a hero there. But he got the boos and the kicks and stuff when he came on, but then he walked around all the stands and it felt like it was just a release of everything, a cleaning of the slate. So maybe Nunes won't get that, but you never know. It could be good for all parties to move on. No,
I must say though, I know you praised Nunes on the podcast earlier this week, but I've been really so impressed. I think I was kind of talking, in my articles about him, and when he signed, I kind of expected him to be more the defensive midfielder, almost the Rodri stand-in that Phillips was meant to be. But the way he's come in, he's been so much more like attacking and energetic, getting forward and exciting. Like, maybe it's on me for not watching Wolves enough. Don't shoot me. But he's a player Guardiola's clearly liked for a long time. Praised him to high heaven after the Sporting Lisbon game a couple of years back, and he's just been so much more. I don't want to say like better than I expected, but like just doing more than I expected. Just on ball, getting forward. Really adding like another dimension to that midfield. And it's just so interesting how City have kind of subtly changed this year. They seem to have just so, with Doku as well, and the way kind of Foden's playing and Kovacic, so many more players who are running with the ball now, just picking it up around the centre circle and just belting forward to it. Maybe a little 1-2, but running, carrying it rather than obviously the slow patient build-up play is still there, of course, but City feel like they're playing a bit faster this year and with a bit more directness, if you think that's
fair. It's a bit more old school, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's
like a 4-2-3-1. I know the midfield, the defence comes in and all that, but the starting lineup's almost pretty classic compared to what we're used to.
I think you're right that Núñez is different to what we expected. I don't think I saw where he fitted in. I think probably thought he was a bit more of a defensive, just passer of the ball, like City have signed a lot of those players, but Guardiola said himself he's explosive when he gets one of them runs. And yeah, I think this City side now they've worked on building a sort of flowing, passing team for so long, and they've won the treble doing that. And then suddenly we've got, like you say, Doku, Núñez, even Kovacic and Haaland now as a big number 9. It feels like a side that would have won the Premier League in 2010.
1994.
Or yeah, it's just like just direct and get the ball, run with it, but also combining that passing. So it's just another evolution of Guardiola's side. But yeah, I think Núñez deserves credit for coming in and just playing his own game and getting stuck in straight away, because it could be easy to come in and just try and play the simple passes, and other players have done it. We've seen so many players take a while to adapt, but he's just gone for it, hasn't he?
Has that myth, well, not myth, because it definitely was true, but has it ended now? Because Alvarez and Haaland both came in last year. Akanji as well, I know it's more an attacking thing, but Haaland and Alvarez both came in last season, pretty excellent. I mean, can't get much more excellent in Haaland's case on his first season. Doku, Núñez, both in this year, taking it to like duck to water. Has that first year buffer zone ended now? Like, was Grealish the last one?
I mean, Phillips is still going through that turnover, isn't he?
I think he might be there for a while.
But yeah, it's refreshing to see players like Núñez, Doku, Haaland, like you say, Alvarez coming in. I think Kovacic looks like he's been in that team for years, especially when it seemed like the transfer window was a bit more reactive than proactive, and sort of signing players later on in the window rather than earlier on. It's good to see those players coming in and saying, yeah, I want this shirt and I'm going to force out these players, helped by players like, with all the injuries, with De Bruyne injured and stuff like that. But you've got to take your chance, and Guardiola will be happy that they're doing that.
Absolutely. Well, Joe, only one last thing to ask, and that is, of course, what will the score be on Saturday?
I'm going 3-0 City. I think it'll be relatively easy.
Yeah, I completely agree. 3-0 to Manchester City. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end of today's episode of the Talking City podcast. Thank you very much for listening. And of course, you know, if you like listening, you can watch as well. You can see my double chins. I'll look for my agenda. It's quite, I'm getting quite self-conscious, but I'm doing my best. So why don't you get over to YouTube, Manchester Evening News _Man City, and get it watched in living colour. And of course, you can get all the latest City news, analysis and opinions on manchestereveningnnews.com/Manchester City. You can get all our articles on Twitter, or do we have to call it X now? Whatever the blimmin' heck it's called, whatever that madman is doing. You can follow us on @ManCityMen. We're on Facebook, of course, no confusion there, Manchester Evening News _Man City. And I think we're on, what else are we on? We're on somewhere. Instagram maybe, ManCityMen. Maybe TikTok. If we're not Manchester Evening News. TikTok, yeah? Oh, I'm getting a thumbs up. We are on TikTok. I presume it's ManCityMen. It is. That's good to know. Just go and follow us on all that stuff. Click subscribe, click like. Thank you very much for listening. We'll see you soon. But until next time, it's goodbye for now. Ta-ra.